Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 125th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it has, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. Since I mentioned Death Grips a good amount in my clipping review, I thought I might as well just give them the final spot in this set of modern classics. In that video, I also alluded to the important spot that Death Grips held during my high school experience. And there was probably a few years that, if you asked me, I would have called them my favorite act in modern music. You may be asking why I took so long to get to them if that's the case. And in reality, it's just the same reason that I haven't covered To Pimp a Butterfly or Atrocity Exhibition. They're just so universally praised and critically acclaimed that sometimes it can feel like there isn't too much left to be said. But considering I've covered such big names from every other decade now, it seemed about time to rip that band-aid off, so I'll probably start tackling some of those really huge modern classics in my next group. The thing with the trio I'm discussing today is over the last decade, there's been no lack of experimental and/or noisy rap acts, but to this day I stand by the notion that none are more enigmatic and one-of-a-kind than Death Grips. There's being alternative or experimental, and then there's these guys who bulldoze their own space in music due to not being able to be pinned down to any one genre. I think the old Dead End Hip Hop review for this album is a perfect way of encapsulating how the casual fan felt about the Grips at the time, with Mike Seatown representing the people like me who adored it, and everyone else being on the total other side. So far on the other side, in fact, that they had a decent amount of back and forth on whether this actually qualified as a hip hop release or not, with some maintaining that Death Grips isn't even a rap act in general. I heavily disagree with that notion, but to be fair, Death Grips have gone out of their way to challenge the preconceived idea of what rapping has to be. Interviews of these guys are pretty scarce. I haven't looked them up recently, but I remember me and some fellow fans in high school listening to super old MC Ride projects before Death Grips. But outside of that, I don't remember being able to find that much about him. The thing is, it's hard to debate that the extreme yelling MC Ride excels with is closer to rapping than it is singing. The beats are somewhat controversial as well, with Zach Hill and Flatlander or Andy Marin using a mix of live instrumentation, loud noise, and glitchy experimental samples. Those two are a bit easier to find information and background on, especially Zach Hill, who's not just a proficient multi-instrumentalist with work in bands like the ILYs, Hella, and a number of others, but he's also a very talented visual artist. He actually shared this hobby with Stefan or MC Ride, whose old paintings that are out online are actually insanely well composed and impressively drawn, though definitely on the bleaker and more disturbing side. Something I didn't know until doing research for this video is that Zach Hill is apparently completely self-taught as a drummer, and even more surprising to any drummers out there is he actually only uses one bass drum and a single bass drum pedal. Both of these facts are pretty admirable when you consider how loose and improvisational his playing can feel, yet the ferocity and speed he hits his drums with adds an essential element to these songs. At times, from what I can tell, they'll opt to go a more traditional hip hop route of beat pads and drum programming, but the execution is anything but traditional, with projects like The Money Store using that aspect to highlight the glitchy, more electronic side that they frequent. Honestly, if I had to guess, my assumption would be Zach is playing an electronic drum set and then sampling these sounds later, as it's hard to picture such an intense, visceral drummer being resigned to just tapping beat pads on an Akai or something. Not that that isn't an art form in itself. I make beats, and trust me, it's the worst when people act like anyone your age has to automatically be adverse to actual drum programming and must be just drag and dropping pre-made loops. The reason why it can be confusing as to who does what in the studio is you can hear a noticeable difference between the live performances and the studio records, which of course isn't necessarily abnormal, but in terms of how the drums sound, it's clear that Zach's off-the-cuff breakneck drumming style is more geared for the live shows. While he may not utilize quite as much live instrumentation to my knowledge, you can definitely hear the influence and inspiration these guys had on more recent forward-thinking MCs like JPEG Mafia, who definitely shares this affinity for the dark web and the more unsettling, yet weirdly nostalgic aspects of that old VHS early internet age. Their methods of releasing music are just like every other aspect of their career, where whatever the fans or labels ask for, these guys will go out of their way to do the opposite of, from cryptic release dates that are elaborate trolls, or sticking it to their former label by releasing No Love Deep Web, with one of the members' bare uncensored cocks as the cover art, of course with the album title written on it in Sharpie. His style of rapping is probably the biggest divider between loving and hating this group, at least on first listen, and it's definitely why you'll hear the argument that he isn't hip hop, which is understandable considering these guys have collaborated with Bjork more than they have actual rappers, to my knowledge at least. Little fun fact, I actually got to see Death Grips live about a decade ago now at one of the first Camp Flog Gnaw carnivals here in LA, where they actually closed out the second and final night. While I lost my phone in the mosh pit and never ended up getting it back, it was probably the most worthwhile set for that to have happened during. While Death Grips really got on everyone's radars the year prior to the Money Store through their stellar 2011 ex-military tape, their virtually flawless follow-up solidified them as an up-and-coming act to really watch out for. Every single album they've crafted has a specific aesthetic and experience in mind, which I've mentioned before is arguably the most important thing for me personally. While their previous effort painted a picture in my mind of a homeless veteran who's full of PTSD and just manically running through the desert, the movie that plays for me when I hear The Money Store has a lot of the same elements just ramped up in a crowded city. The character that MC Ride portrays is full of anxiety, paranoia, and most likely every drug under the sun. And his poetic lyrics and style of delivery are so idiosyncratic, it's hard to imagine anyone else getting this concept across as directly, while still being so open to interpretation. For example, the first track here is not just filled with lyrical gems, it happens to be the song that really sold me on Death Grips, and I assume many others as well, considering even my sister had found herself admitting it was stuck in her head, to the point I'd heard her sing the chorus and even downloaded the song. And this is someone who isn't even very fond of hip hop, let alone experimental hip hop. But while the noisy, clustered instrumental is quite literally music to my ears, it's Stefan's beautifully abstract lyrics that made me go from a casual listener to a true fan. He's someone who's so dense with his writing, I could really pull any track from the entire Grips discography, go to a random timestamp in the song, and the lyrics would be golden. So I'm just gonna share his opening verse on The Money Store. After the first instance of the memorable hook, MC Ride comes in with tailpipe dragging, volume blasting, bailing out my brain. Red light flash, then stop I smash. Abraxas hydroplane, massive, catch this flight flow rating madness, mastered mine, and lace the Av with black catfish tailing waves of stratus. Curb right to far left lane. Don't wait for me if I care about anything, anywhere. Losing myself, I get the stares. What I'm looking at wasn't there. I also want to share my favorite line off this amazing first track, which is definitely drilled a hole into my head, pierced the bone, and felt the breeze. Lift my thoughts out them sick bed with a pair of crow skeleton wings. Know nothing since then, it seems. Been floating through the nexus, threading dreams, but did you know? There's obviously way too many amazing moments to mention on this thing, but despite it being another one of those LPs I wouldn't change even if I could, in fairness to my other videos, I'm still gonna have to cut down the track list a bit for my honorable mentions. So while I heavily enjoy the ones I'm skipping over, the tracks I want to shout out would have to be The Fever, Lost Boys, I've Seen Footage, System Blower, Punk Wait, Bitch Please, and Hacker. The three songs on here that have gotten the most play for me over time would definitely have to be Get Got, Double Helix, and Hustle Bones. Thank you for watching my 125th video. Next time, we're going to loop back around to the 1980s, so see what legend I'm going to start that group off with. And if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs off this noisy game changer are. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.